That's interesting to think about the ineffable as something that is not static. Because thinking about the word, I was thinking about it initially kind of in the context of, art can't be described. Like which to some extent I agree with. It is experiential and things that we relate with from a bodily perspective. We can't exactly, I don't know if we can describe them in words. We certainly can't exactly create that experience in another, maybe in words, because it's coming from their experience, will come from their lens. But on the other hand, I was like looking at other definitions for this word, and one of them was that things that are begging description. And I loved that there was both things indescribable and begging of description. And
sounds like art.
Right?
I'm Cybele Maylone. I'm the executive director of Urban Glass, so I work closely with Ben. And next month will become the executive director of the Aldrich Contemporary Art Museum. So during the past 5.5 years, I've been leading the organization through a significant period of change as we renovated the building and reopened our facility. And Urban Glass is home to a very large professional studio community of artists and designers that are making work in kind of all types of glass, and also, as Ben noted, a workshop program that aims to give artists of all ages and abilities access to the material, and also tries, as an organization, I think all of our programs really aim to kind of push what artists are able to do in that material, both from a technical perspective, like we have equipment of all shapes and sizes, but also pushing into more conceptual territories that allow artists that maybe are not familiar with the material to integrate it into their work. We also have an exhibition program and a store on our ground floor space and publish a magazine, Glass Quarterly. So I've been, unlike Ben, I had no glass training or knowledge before coming to Urban Glass, but it's been a really fascinating, it is a fascinating place, and it's been a fascinating material to learn about, and actually kind of weirdly, I think, fitting for the topic at hand in terms of something being ineffable. But it's also a big, but thinking of a big moving group of bacteria is also how I might describe it.
Can you say more about what you're thinking around glass as a vector for talking about the ineffable?
Well, I think one of the reasons, I think one of the great pleasures of my job is that I get to spend a lot of time with artists and find out what draws them to the material. And I think the ineffable nature of glass, or the fact that glass is often there and not there, is one of the reasons that it, I think, has remained an incredibly vital material for art making. It's because of that kind of duality almost that is pretty unique to the material, or it possesses those qualities in pretty unique ways, unlike other, like plastic, for example. There's some kind of optical qualities that are pretty distinct. So I think it's almost that, there are many reasons that artists are drawn to glass, but I think that is one that's pretty significant, and just one that I've been thinking about as I've been thinking about this topic. And I hear from artists as they come to our studio or they spend time in our studio in many different ways, but that kind of idea of transparency.
Pose-toi sur mes doigts mesurés, je te livre ma conscience et son rythme de chair, je te livre les feux où brasille ma faiblesse, je te livre le chain gang, je te livre le marais.
My name is Lionel Cruet. I'm a visual artist and art educator. Mostly my work surrounds a lot of investigations with audiovisual material and audiovisual installations, collecting narratives and stories from people and recreating spaces, environments, and sensorial experiences. I consider part of my practice very fluid with working through participatory and participation engagement with communities and groups of people, sort of like bringing their voices and blending into the experience and to the scaffolding of the work. My work as an art educator, I focus working with immigrant youth, specifically with international, English new language acquisition and some other areas in reinforcement and literacy. And my vision is just to blend in some aesthetic appreciation and using art as a form of communication and as a form of language. And that is something that has, have kept me being here, for most of the time in New York City. I'm originally from Puerto Rico, so I have my practice is between both places.
Typhoon Day, Fukuoka, Japan, 092.
Pues nada, se compara a estar en casa, pero ante esta puesta de sol me he pensado a descansar un poco a orillas del glaciar.
My name is Alexandra Hammond, and I am a painter with an interdisciplinary practice. And I think the idea that kind of unifies my work is I'm really interested in this idea that everything is always existing in relation, that nothing kind of is in and of itself, but that things, people, personalities are always in a state of kind of unfolding and co-creation. So in paintings, that shows up in the form of paintings where images are bleeding off of the panel or the canvas, and paintings are kind of interacting with one another. Sometimes I'm making transparent paintings that kind of one can always see through or even walk through the picture because it's set up like a curtain. So in that case, the image is never autonomous because you can always see the surrounding room or space. And it also shows up in kind of installation works such as modular epic landscapes, which are like a landscape backdrop that also invites performance. And doing that type of work has led me to create conversational performances where I often show up in character, and viewers become participants and can come and have an intimate conversation with me. So that's the way that my work currently manifests, and I'm looking forward to speaking about this in relation to the ineffable.
I'm curious about what keeps you up at night. You're the second person who said that so far. What about people shining flashlights in your faces? How about you? Yeah.
Just thinking about the next day.
So my name is Marilyn Narota, and I am likewise an interdisciplinary artist. My work, I guess, manifests in terms of sculpture, performance-based videos, and installation work as well. My installation work, it also invites participation, so I try to make it socially engaged and bring people into a different environment. And most of it has to do with multiculturalism and the experience of being an immigrant. I was born in Colombia in South America, and I've been living in New York since the age of 7. So I've always been straddling that line between two different cultures. So I guess it gives me a unique perspective, and as many people who are from other countries and have had to live somewhere else can know what it's like. I also make work that has a lot to do with feminism and the point of view that as a female, we have to deal with a lot of social norms that like to tell us what we should look like, how we should behave. And I like to challenge those norms, really explore what they mean and what are the implicit messages that we sort of absorb and sometimes we're not completely aware of. So I've made a lot of performance-based videos to address that. Also sculptures that use familiar objects, usually from the domestic realm, paired with dangerous objects like razor blades and embedded in a bar of soap, just to explore that uncanny sense of alienation. I also have a training in clinical psychology research, so I guess my interest in perception and the uncanny comes from there.
Interesting. My name is Benjamin Wright. I am the Director of Education at Urban Glass for the last 4 years. I've worked closely with Cybele to develop a really diverse education program upstairs that examines a number of different things through a filter of glass as a material. So we look at video and performance art as it relates to glass, photography and other pursuits, but also teaching people and exposing people to the material of glass. My own background is a little more varied. I started as an evolutionary biologist and then pursued a pretty classical craft training, and then went to Rhode Island School of Design and got my master's in what is basically a conceptual art material-based program. So my artwork really sits in the middle of all of those things. I work with plants and animals, and much like many of you make installation work. Lately it has taken on a style of sort of hypersensory environments where the audience is literally presented too much information from too many directions to really, for their normal filters to operate in terms of how they consume artwork, or that's the intention. In terms of the conceptual basis of my work, I'm really always looking at humans and their environment, but in that sense, where we as individuals end and everything else begins. And I think in terms of thinking about the ineffable and grounding this, if you can ground anything in the ineffable, I'm not sure, but that is where that really nebulous zone, if we're made mostly of bacteria, what is it that makes us human? Where do we end, and where does that sort of communal walking bacteria pool start? Those kind of questions are fascinating to me in terms of things I can't describe or borders that I can't describe. And I think its transparent nature, if it's a character, works in both its advantage and its disadvantage. I mean, by all, nobody's referring to this as the glass age, but there are all the buildings around us are coated in glass. Everybody has a piece of glass in their pocket, but it's transparent. We look through it. We don't register it a lot. So the fact that it is omnipresent, it's ground up in the streets that we're driving over. It is a vital material in terms of technology and stuff, but it is very hard for people to grasp as a material. How can a liquid turn into this thing that I can hold in my hand? And for that very reason, we find it to be enormously useful material to talk to particularly young students about. It presents all kinds of science. There's still some of open questions about how glass chemistry works and why it does the things that it does. It's kind of a very unique substance on Earth, and as Cybele said, it is there but not there.
I've never worked in glass, but you guys are making me want to try out glass.
Well, that's our job. We're good at it.
The pitch worked.
But I think too, if you go further into the optics, so what does that allow the material to do? And it has allowed us to explore microscopic realms and universal realms that were inaccessible to humans and are still, because we can't sense them with our senses, we only experience them through these man-made objects and determine that that is a real or accurate portrayal of that world that we can't sense. So I also think it is a doorway into all kinds of other ineffable realms, that we accept that what we look at through a microscope is what it looks like on the microscopic level when we can't look on the microscopic level. And I've engaged a little bit in that, in a pursuit, which as a visual artist is very interesting to try and make invisible art, right? But to make things on a microscopic level that create reality in a sense on a microscopic, or reality on a microscopic level, which is all quite relative. It depends on what you look at, what you look through, all of which are to our own making, you know.
I think it's also interesting how glass is an evolving material. It doesn't really stay static forever. It's almost alive in a way. So when you look at those old stained glass windows, that you can see that they're still evolving and dripping over time with the heat and with just their own weight. So that sort of makes me think about my work in relation to something that seems to be permanent and static, but at the same time is always moving, but not in a way that is apparent. And also the presence of the body when it comes to something like glass. The fact that it seems so pristine and smooth and perfect reminds me of, in society, how a lot of different groups are told to be certain ways. And you have to be, this is you as an immigrant, this is you as a Colombian, this is you as a female or a male. There's so many prescribed ways of being, but really they're always evolving with society reacting, not reacting. And I think that speaks to the always changing quality of people, and something as perfect and I guess at this point perfected by technology. The screens on cell phones and that we interact with. I mean, we made this happen, this glass. We are sort of we have constructed our own identities at this point, but we're not really sure what that means or what they are because they're always in flux.
Adding to what you're saying, I think is very interesting, because I see, I learned about how to actually like bend glass and, produce like neons and everything. So seeing and having that experience, and adding to the conversation and to whatever, the details that we're adding up in here, makes me think also that, glass is a primordial material to create lenses for for cameras and for ways of seeing. And I always, when I talk about my work and when I talk about how I understand things, how I research about things, how I perceive, there's always this point of perception and interaction. I always try to see things from many lenses, right? And I think I'm trying to come across with that, metaphor, because, there's not one way of seeing things, there's multiple ways of seeing things. And this idea that a lens can be always adjusted, can be always, manipulated to be able to like get different depth of perception. Even with all of us, some of us are wearing glasses, right? It's an adjustment. It's an adjustment of a certain, certain perceptual reality. And I'm very, very, drawn into that, and how we, how even cameras and our own biological, features, how we're manipulating how we engage with an environment. And that's something that is super fascinating.
Well, isn't that interesting that there's like a chosen viewpoint that you're all, or the three of you have like decided, like maybe your perception is totally valid and accurate, it's just different, and that we've decided that there is granted, it's also maybe difficult to navigate the world without a certain correction, but that there is a predetermined way that we should average towards perceiving the world, or something like that.
I was just thinking that it's like, what is the 2020 vision? I don't know actually how that's determined, like from a technical point of view either, so I don't have much ground to talk about it, but like who decides what is the in focus view and where that should end or not.
And I think metaphorically it speaks to everything that you're talking about. If there's one way to perceive a culture, or perceive or exist or navigate a culture, or that we're all trying to average towards one thing instead of enjoying the fact that we all perceive the world in radically different ways, you know.
Right, and there's that implicit presence of the body and of the individual. We all have a different perspective, just sitting from different angles in this space, but also because we have different experiences in the world. And like you said, there are different lenses that color our visions of the world and our opinions and how we see each other and how we see ourselves, which is actually really interesting. And just like even a piece of glass, it's going to look different depending on what angle, right? You look at it, sometimes it's very narrow, sometimes you can see right through it, sometimes it reflects light. So there's that quality, that ineffable quality that's always changing, and it's hard to really describe.
The interesting thing about aesthetic appreciation is it's about that. You get into, you know, this field of the unknown and this field of like, you know, you're relying on that on orchestrating, you know, some sort of like feedback. And when I work with students specifically, and I engage in conversations when, you know, when they are completely unfamiliar to a work of art, when, you know, my knowledge of it gets it to a certain point, you know, it opens the door to, you know, many possibilities. And I think that is when I find like this richness of this, you know, and, you know, the conversation that is generated, you know, about it, around it, and about what everyone perceives and what everyone thinks about certain things and what was the intention of the artist. You know, there's something that I'm very interested in. It's about, you know, time and space, and I did I built this sort of curriculum lesson on the work of Félix González Torres, The Perfect Lovers, the two clocks that are connected and, you know, synchronized. And I presented to my group of students, and they all brought like a complete, you know, like, well-rounded perspectives about it. And, you know, there's always this myth that how can you like teach contemporary art? How can you like even start a discussion about contemporary art and about things that are like much more complex? And for me, I find that, you know, it was a very rewarding experience and refreshing that there was no necessary a conversation about that was surrounded about like the material or anything about that. It was just more about the ideas and what the work is saying, what the work is not saying. And I found those conversations very rich, you know, and aesthetic appreciation does that, right? It's this has no definition, right? It just is built up with a group.
What is their comfort? I haven't spent a lot of time in that kind of experience. Like, what is their comfort level in a conversation where there is no clear answer? I mean, because I know with adults, like, it's a fascinating part of my job is talking about the work that we do and how there aren't even answers about glass. Like, scientists can't even agree on that. Like, so there is often an ambiguity that comes with talking about art that often can cause discomfort, which is what I think is actually the most interesting part of it. But I wonder what it's like having those conversations with students, with children.
No, absolutely. I mean, I work usually with like older youth, like between the age of like 16, 17 up to 21. So they have, you know, an experience already, you know, about like the world, one's more than others. And I think that also adds up. And I think just creating, you know, when we're talking about aesthetic appreciation, because there's not right or wrong, you know, there's always a commentary that could be added up just based on perceptual, based on experiences. And that is when it gets very interesting. And in my experience, I felt that the more mature or the older a person gets, the more restraints and restrictions they put on how they engage with things that are very ambiguous or unknown. And when it comes specifically to that piece, you know, because there's so many components, although it's very simple and it can be always dismissed, it is fascinating to see how they, you know, are able to connect with so many, you know, clipping points and, you know, like make notes and bookmarks.
It does make sense on about like if you're a toddler, everything is novel and confusing and ineffable in a way, you know. And then as you grow older, you try and fool yourself that you have a more complete understanding of the universe that you're existing in. So therefore, it's more discomforting when you're continually presented with evidence that you have no idea about the universe that you're living in. Absolutely. So I think you're right. I totally agree. I think talking to kids with very abstract work, they're fine that it's like they don't understand half of the things in their world. So this is another thing, and they're trying to figure it all out. And I think, unfortunately, I think adults have to sort of be, I don't want to say tricked, but yeah, a little bit tricked into getting back into that childish brain or that inventive, investigative brain. Yeah.
And being comfortable with the uncomfortable, with the unknown. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So much of art is exploration. I feel like a lot of the time I'm exploring a topic that I'm not even sure what it is that I feel about it. I just know I feel something about it, and I want to know how it relates to me, how it relates to the society that I grew up in. A lot of it is feminist artwork for me, so I make artwork that sometimes I'm not even sure how it's going to turn out in performance or videos that you make, anything that's not scripted. You're going to find out things as you go along. You're going to know things from the experience of it that you didn't know before. Also, you brought up Felix Gonzalez Torres, which made me think of the definition of ineffable as something that's forbidden or taboo as well. So I feel like that, I mean, you have to address in artwork, or a lot of people do, like Felix Gonzalez Torres, try to address things that are very hard to talk about, like sexuality or being gay or having HIV, as he does. These are things that are not easy to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about them. There's just very little conversation about it. And through art, through artwork, we can say so much and yet not say anything. And that's the presence and not presence of art as well as glass.